2006, a series of unexpected deaths in Japan sparked what would become one of the largest global criminal investigations in modern history. These weren't random, they weren't accidental, they were targeted, and they were all heart attacks. At the time, law enforcement just called him the heart attack killer. Online communities gave him a different name, a name that would spread fear across the world: Kira. To truly understand this case, you first have to understand two men: Light Yagami and a man who simply went by a single letter: L. Recently, someone published a book called If I Were Kira. This manuscript is part memoir, part psychological study, and at sometimes it seems as if it's part confession. This book offers a perspective rarely seen, someone who tried to think like Kira and tried to think against L. Someone who asked not just who Kira was, but what would I do if I were Kira? But the Kira case wasn't just a confrontation between two brilliant minds. It was the collision of philosophy, morality, and global panic. Because once the pattern became undeniable, once it became clear someone out there could kill anyone, anywhere, without even touching them, the world would change forever. And while governments scrambled to explain what was happening, internet communities did what they did best. They built theories, thousands of them, Reddit threads, Japanese BBS boards, anonymous emails sent to news outlets. Most of them were nonsense, of course, but one theory kept coming up. Whoever's doing this, they're choosing these victims deliberately. And obviously, this person has a purpose to these killings. That purpose would become the center of a quiet war between two people who never met face to face. A killer armed with something that we still fully don't understand, and the detective who understood everything else. And that's where the evidence that we've compiled today, along with this new book, would factor into the Kira case. Throughout this new manuscript, the author analyzes the early deaths as if we were recreating a crime scene, victims' criminal histories, and the timing of each fatal heart attack, even the emotional impact on the public. They break it down as if they were an FBI profiler, or like someone who wanted to understand just how far Kira's logic reached. As Light Yagami and L began their silent war, this anonymous author was watching it unfold from the sidelines, studying it, cataloging it, trying to crack a case at the time that looked like it came straight out of a horror comic book. What you're about to see today has never been presented in one place before. We've reconstructed the timeline, collected eyewitness accounts, pulled archived police records, and consulted experts, including the mysterious author of If I Were Kira, to bring you the most complete picture of the Kira investigation ever assembled. Today, I present you with the Kira Files, unredacted. To understand how the world unraveled, we have to go back to the beginning. Before the hysteria, before the trials, before the cults, before the name Kira even meant anything. It starts with one boy, Light Yagami, 17 years old, top of his class, no criminal record, no history of violence, no signs of radicalization, just bored. On paper, Light was the kind of kid who ended up in law school or running a tech startup. But in the weeks before the killings began, classmates would later recall something else, a kind of bitterness, some sort of frustration at the world, with justice, with the system itself, or maybe it was just a feeling of inadequacy. Cut to June 18, 2006, a date that appears in nearly every timeline of the case. The day Light Yagami found something, or witnessed something outside of his school around 3:30 p.m. Clear skies, no major events were recorded, and yet something falls from the sky. It's described as a black notebook, weathered, unmarked, except for two words pressed on the cover: Death Note. Now, normally this would be the part where we talk about fingerprints, trace evidence, manufacturing sources, but here's the problem. No such notebook has ever been found, not even fragments. All the information we have on the Death Note are from first-hand accounts of the detectives who are working the Kira case. By June 20th, a man takes hostages at a nursery school in Tokyo. He dies of a heart attack before the police can even breach the building. June 22nd, a domestic abuser in Osaka collapses mid-argument. June 23rd, a serial rapist dies in custody, seconds before interrogation. By the end of the week, 15 criminals were dead, all from sudden cardiac arrest, all with no preceding symptoms, and all precisely 30 to 40 seconds after doing something wrong. But this pattern is impossible. Too clean, too controlled. It seemed like something out of a horror movie or a Japanese manga, or God's punishment for the damned. Nevertheless, all of these deaths got attention from the world's greatest detective, a man who simply goes by one letter, L. We have no confirmed age for L, no confirmed nationality, not even a confirmed race. You see, L sees something in the deaths that no one else does. The timing, the precision, the escalation. He concludes very early that these are not natural deaths. This is homicide. And he also determines that the killer lives in Japan, specifically in the Kanto area. A decision that, in retrospect, brings him dangerously close to the truth. On July 3rd, 2006, a broadcast airs across Japan. A message from a convicted criminal claiming to speak for the police. The message is simple. Kira, if you're watching this, stop the killings. 30 seconds later, he collapses. Heart attack, live on television. But what the public didn't know, and what investigators wouldn't admit for years, is that the broadcast was a trap. A decoy only aired in the Kanto region. L was watching to see if the killer would respond, and he did. It was at this moment L realized Kira wasn't guessing. He wasn't striking at random. He was watching, listening, and choosing his victims closely. And this would be our starting point. One teenager, one impossible notebook, one detective with no name, and the opening moves of what would become the most psychologically complex criminal case in recorded history. And yet, this is only the beginning. By late July, the situation in Japan had escalated beyond anything local authorities could handle. 15 deaths had turned into dozens. Panic spread throughout every major city, and international pressure forced the United States to intervene. In early August 2006, the FBI quietly deployed a team of 12 undercover FBI agents to Japan. Their mission was simple, but nearly impossible: identify Kira without being identified themselves. One of the FBI agents that was sent to Japan was named Ray Pember, a well-regarded investigator, clean record, no history of misconduct, engaged to a former detective named Naomi Misora. But both of these two would become key figures in what would happen next. On August 14th, 2006, Ray observed something quite unusual that he would record in his journal. A young man sitting quietly on the train, watching him. That man was Light Yagami. At the time, he had no criminal profile, no reason for suspicion, no connection to any victim, and yet, within hours of that encounter, 9 FBI agents would be dead. The exact details of what happened next are still being debated, but what's clear is this: Light Yagami manipulated Ray Pember into handing over very sensitive FBI intel. Names, faces, and assignments. Everything he would need to eliminate all the agents without even touching them. Investigators still can't explain how a teenager convinced a trained FBI agent to follow his instructions. Some say it was coercion. Some say it was psychological manipulation. But mysteriously enough, Pember's final transmission simply read, "I'm sorry." Minutes later, Ray Pember collapsed from a sudden cardiac arrest on the Tokyo subway platform, becoming Kira's 19th recorded victim. And this is where the case takes its darkest turn. Naomi Misora wasn't just Pember's fiancée. She was a former FBI agent herself. She had worked closely on the infamous Los Angeles BB murder cases, a case L personally oversaw. She was sharp, disciplined, and exceptionally experienced with dealing with abnormal criminals. But she would make one grave mistake. On the day she began her own unofficial investigation, she met a polite, well-spoken young man near the police department. He introduced himself as a member of the Japanese task force, but this polite young man was none other than Light Yagami. In the hours after speaking with Light, Naomi vanished. Her phone traced to an abandoned construction site, then nothing. No calls, no witnesses, no sign of struggle. Despite extensive searches, her body was never found. Official reports list her as missing, but investigators familiar with the case quietly agree Naomi Misora was murdered. But here's the truly disturbing part. Unlike most of Kira's victims, Naomi's death was never made public, never announced, never claimed. Whatever happened to her, someone out there wanted it buried. With the FBI withdrawn and a key witness missing, the Japanese police were paralyzed. Dozens of officers resigned, some out of fear, some out of suspicion because L himself warned that Kira might be among them. In the end, only 6 officers chose to stay and assist L. Among them, Light's own father, Sorichiro Yagami. And this is where the investigation becomes something else entirely. With the FBI gone and Naomi missing, L was effectively alone. He had no face, no official authority, no allies except 6 nervous officers, and a killer who seemed to be everywhere at once. But L did have one advantage. The deaths had stopped. To him, this wasn't a coincidence. That was behavior, pattern recognition. It meant Kira was adjusting, watching, and waiting. So L made a decision that would change the entire trajectory of the case. He ordered surveillance, not of criminals, but of the police officers' families. Because L believed Kira wasn't just in Japan, he believed Kira was close, very close. Close enough to know the identities of the FBI agents he killed, and close enough to know the inner workings of the task force. But at the center of his suspicion was one family, the Yagami family. Sorichiro Yagami was the head of the NPA, one of Japan's highest ranking police officials. He was respected, disciplined, honest to a fault, and that made him vulnerable. Because if Kira had access to privileged information, Sorichiro was the most likely point of contact. L installed cameras throughout the Yagami house. In the ceilings, behind the vents, inside clocks, no room was off limits, not even the bathroom. And in one of the most ethically questionable moves in modern investigation history, he authorized surveillance of Sorichiro's teenage son, Light Yagami, top student, no record, no threats, no reason to be considered a suspect except one. He lived in the right place at the right time. For weeks, the cameras showed nothing unusual. Light studied, ate dinner with his family, did homework, and yet, every time a criminal died, Light had an alibi. But L noticed something strange, something subtle, something that would later become one of the most analyzed moments in the case. Light seemed to snack a lot. And not in the way that teenage boys like to snack on things. He seemed to snack a lot. A lot. Specifically on potato chips. He would sit at his desk for hours writing, snacking, studying, in a perfectly ordinary, perfectly boring way. Except investigators noticed 2 things. Light's grades maintained flawless, and criminals continued dying. L began to wonder if Light wasn't studying, but hiding. And later, evidence confirms the truth. Light had found the cameras, all of them, and he left no trace somehow. For the first time in his career, L miscalculated, not by being wrong, but by being right too early. So L had no other choice but to throw all his cards on the table and reveal himself, publicly, to Light Yagami. Under the alias Ryuga Hideki, L enrolled in the same university Light attended. Same building, same classes, same proximity. For the first time, the world's greatest detective and the world's most elusive serial killer sat in the same exact room, breathing the same air, both pretending to be normal. When Light introduced himself, L responded with 7 words that would define the next phase of the investigation. I believe you are Kira, Light Yagami. This was no longer a criminal case. It was psychological warfare. A duel fought with smiles, politeness, and academic competition. 2 geniuses, each trying to kill each other without breaking character. But where do we stand now? The surveillance failed, the FBI operation failed, and Naomi Mizura vanished. What would be L's next move to try to catch Kira? As the investigation deepened, the Japanese National Police found themselves in uncharted territory. They were tracking a killer with no discernible pattern of movement, no fingerprints, no forensic evidence, and, disturbingly, no margin of error. Kira didn't make mistakes. Kira eliminated anyone who stood in his way. With global panic rising, Japan became the epicenter of a crisis unlike anything law enforcement had ever faced. It didn't take long for the United States to get involved. With the FBI dead and Naomi Mizura missing, with the FBI discontinuing their operations in Japan, Japan's National Police Agency was forced to make a choice: shut down the investigation or escalate it beyond anything that they ever attempted before. They would choose escalation. The Kira task force would be small, handpicked off the books, and completely isolated from the rest of the law enforcement. Only 6 men agreed to stay. Each was warned, if your name is exposed, you will die. If your family is exposed, they will die. And if you ever doubt your loyalty to the case, you should leave now. The members of the task force were required to sever ties with the outside world. Fake deaths, no contact with family, no digital footprints. They weren't just hunting a killer now, they were hiding from one. And above them all, pulling the strings from the shadows, was L. Light Yagami, the man that L suspected more than anyone else, volunteered to join the investigation. On paper, it made sense. He was brilliant, calm under pressure, and the son of the task force's leader. But to L, this wasn't cooperation, it was proximity to the investigation. In one of the most extreme counterintelligence measures ever recorded, L made a decision that stunned even his own team. He handcuffed himself to Light Yagami. For weeks, they ate together, studied together, investigated together, slept together within arm's reach of each other. But this wasn't surveillance, this was a psychological siege. To understand why this mattered, we have to talk psychology. Modern criminology often references something called the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Light Yagami exhibited all three. Narcissism, an unwilling belief that he alone could fix the world. Machiavellianism, his willingness to manipulate anyone, including his own family. Psychopathy, his emotional detachment from the lives he took. L, on the other hand, weaponized those traits against him. For a brief moment in the investigation, everything stopped. No criminals died, no heart attacks, no messages from Kira. And that should have been proof. If Light Yagami was Kira, the killings should have continued. But L didn't relax, because killers don't stop, they adapt. This uneasy peace wouldn't last, because while L and Light were locked together, someone else was watching. And soon, the world would learn that there was more than one Kira. Enter the second Kira. The deadlock didn't break with a mistake, it broke with a message. In early September, a local broadcasting station received a package. No return address, no fingerprints. Inside, a videotape. What played next sent shockwaves through the investigation. But this Kira was different. The voice was higher, the language was emotional, erratic, and personal. The original Kira spoke like a judge, but this one spoke almost like they were a fan. They claimed to see Kira's victims die without knowing their names, without knowing their faces, and they were determined to meet him. For L, this confirmed something terrifying. The killings didn't require proximity. They didn't require personal information. They didn't even require the person's identity. Enter Misa Amane. Misa Amane, model, public figure, and now the prime suspect in a supernatural homicide investigation. Misa's parents had been murdered years earlier. Their killer walked free until Kira executed him. To Misa, Kira wasn't a criminal. He was justice. At this point, investigators were forced to confront an idea most of them had been avoiding. There was no known method, scientific or medical, that can explain these killings. No poison, no pathogen, no device. So L documented something unprecedented. Non-human intermediary involvement possible. In modern terms, we'd call it paranormal. In L's notes, he called it necessary to consider. L would hit a wall in his investigation, not knowing when or will both Kiras would eventually meet. Until one day he saw an interaction between Light and Misa Amane. This grew his interest so much that L staked it with nearly 100% certainty that Light was the first Kira and Misa was the second Kira, based off of their interaction with each other. And to test his theory, L did something extreme. He imprisoned both of them indefinitely. No charges, no contact. And for weeks, the killings apparently completely stopped. For the first time, L faced a possibility that he had never allowed himself to consider. What if Light Yagami wasn't Kira? I know, this doesn't make any sense. He captured Light and the killing stopped. In his mind, this should have made it 100% clear that Light was Kira. But something seemed strange. But during the investigation process and what was caught on tape, Light didn't seem to act like his usual self. And if he wasn't, then L had imprisoned 2 innocent people and let the real Kira escape. This wouldn't just be a professional failure, it would be a moral one. With 2 new deaths after capturing Misa and Light, pressure mounted. And eventually, El made the call. He released them. And that decision would ultimately cost him everything. Because while Light was sat in his cell, someone else had been killing in his place. Once Light and Misa were released, the killings didn't resume immediately. And that delay told El everything he needed to know. Kira wasn't acting alone. Or maybe he never was. The task force noticed a pattern. Executives connected to one Japanese conglomerate, the Yatsuba Group, were making unusually aggressive moves. Competitors died, whistleblowers died, and stock prices soared. To El, it looked less like vigilantism and more like organized crime. This is the moment the investigation changed permanently. At this point, Kira wasn't a person, Kira was a position, and Light Yagami was still involved. Investigators to this day still aren't sure, but they hypothesize that Light wiped his own memories of being Kira for a while and then got them back. I know it doesn't make any sense, but that's the only logical conclusion investigators came up with. Without his memories, Light assisted the investigation genuinely. He helped identify Yotsuba executives, predicted their moves, even suggested surveillance tactics. To the task force, this was proof of innocence. To El, it was proof of capability. The Yotsuba Kira was eventually exposed. He was arrested and the killing stopped. And then something terrifying happened. Within days of the arrest, criminals began dying again. Kira, and that meant only one thing. The real Kira was back. And this time, El knew exactly who it was. In the weeks that followed, El's behavior changed. He stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. He wrote notes obsessively. He knew he was running out of time, which is why on November 28th, El died. Officially, the cause was never disclosed. No autopsy report, no public statement. All that remains is footage and the silence that followed. El's death marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of something far worse. Because with El gone, there was no one left to stop Kira. El's death was never announced to the public. There was no press conference, no obituary, no confirmation that the world's greatest detective had ever existed at all. Internally, the task force was told the investigation would continue, but everyone in the room understood the truth. This wasn't a continuation, it was a surrender. In the months following El's death, crime rates dropped globally. Wars slowed, cartels disbanded, corrupt officials resigned. To many, this was proof that Kira worked. The fear was effective. Governments stopped condemning Kira, then they stopped investigating him. Then, some quietly began supporting him. This wasn't justice anymore, it was compliance. But unbeknownst to the public, El had prepared for his own death. Uemi's house was an institution designed to produce minds capable of replacing El. 2 successors emerge, both brilliant, both flawed, both convinced the other was wrong. One young man named Nier believed in patience, distance, and analysis. And another young man named Mello believed in chaos, pressure, and fear. They weren't just chasing Kira. They were trying to prove they deserved to replace El. For 5 years, Kira ruled the world. Executions became normalized, fear became policy, and Light Yagami rose to the top. He wasn't just part of the investigation anymore. He was the investigation. But absolute power doesn't corrupt, it exposes. Nier would notice patterns, delays, inconsistencies. And for the first time since El's death, Kira made a mistake. The final confrontation didn't happen in a courtroom or a prison or on a battlefield. It happened in a warehouse, quiet and unremarkable. And that's where the world finally saw Kira, not as a god, but as a man. When the evidence was revealed, Light didn't deny it, he justified it. And in that moment, the myth died. Light Yagami was killed while attempting to flee. No trial, no verdict, no closure. Today, the Kira case is officially closed. The files unredacted, so they say. Most of the files regarding the case are unredacted, but its effects still remain. Crime never returned to previous levels. Fear never left public consciousness, and the question that haunted El still wasn't answered. If Kira was wrong, why did the world listen?